Hi, I'm Dave Jones. I work for Red Hat, and I maintain the Fedora kernel. I've been to the Kernel Summit every year since 2001, I think it was. Everyone except for the first one. It's got a lot more informal, I think, and we've definitely steered more towards the sort of less technical sort of aspects, whereas before we deep dive into lots of talks about how this driver needs to be improved for this reason or whatever, or why we need this file system changed or whatever. But now it's more about the sort of process aspects of what problems we have there. So it's more about like the people these days, I think, than the actual technology. I think it's important to at least get everyone in the same room at least once a year, just to you can conduct the majority of what we do over mailing lists just fine, but I think the higher bandwidth of just getting everyone in the same room, just getting people to sit down, bash out the details of something together, I think that's definitely a valuable thing that we can't really do without. So at least once a year, I think getting the right people in the right place, definitely a good thing to have. So every distribution has its own set of scripts to create what's called an init.rd, initial RAM disk, which contains the drivers you need to actually find your root file system and basically get your system up and running. And every distribution does this completely differently. There's no commonality between them whatsoever, and there's no good reason for that. They all do pretty much exactly the same thing. There's some feature disparity between distributions, but otherwise, on the whole, they largely do exactly the same thing. So it seems kind of crazy that we have all these distributions working on their own isolated things that do exactly the same thing with no collaboration between them, no sharing of improvements. And even worse, when someone working on one distro makes a change, tests on their distro, and it works just fine, there's no guarantee that that change is going to work fine on another distro because they haven't tested every single distro. So I think unifying the set of tools or the set of scripts to create this is actually going to be useful definitely for preventing boot time regressions in that sense. Mostly positive, but I think the largest positive reaction was the proposed killing off of some of the more nasty parts of Red Hat's boot process. But there's been no sort of code or anything written yet, so it's all very, very early days. We'll see how it works out. I don't really know. I mean, I have this problem of I'll just dive into a problem without really, scoping it out. I'll volunteer for something and just say, sure, I'll do this. This should be fun, and then by biting off more than I can chew. And it's I've done quite a lot of stuff in Linux that way, and it's definitely a fun way to work, so we'll see where it takes me. Pretty much the same thing that I talked about at Kernel Summit, but that's the talk I gave today is going to be one of 3 sessions. The other 2 sessions are on it's similar kind of things. One of them is on, the other 2 are both on speeding up boot time. So everyone wants their laptops and what have you to boot as quickly as possible. And we have one demo where someone from power on boots up to a working desktop in 5 seconds, which is pretty impressive to see. So there's going to be some talk on how we can sort of take the ideas used there and how we can generalize those into a regular distro. I hope so. I mean, it remains to be seen, so ask me in a few days' time, but I'm optimistic that it'll actually be a useful use of time. Oh, 5 years from now. Probably exactly the same thing. We'll all be a little grumpier, a little less hair. More of the same, I would imagine. I mean, we seem to be getting things done pretty well now. I mean, the whole sort of process when we changed our working processes around the 2.5 to 2.6 era. We had some sort of bumps along the way, and then we got all our sort of process issues there kind of mostly worked out, I think. And now the whole sort of merging patches thing and dealing with regressions, we're starting to get some real procedures in place which are making us it's a pretty well-oiled machine right now, I think. Tough one. Not really one thing. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people I want to see and talk to about various things. I mean, as a distro kernel maintainer, I get a pretty wide sort of view of not just the problems in the kernel, but of the distro as a whole, and the integration between both user space and kernel components. So it'll be useful for me to bump into and talk to a whole bunch of people here. So. It's kind of tricky because it's not an easy sort of part of the Linux ecosystem to get involved in. You really need to know quite a lot about how the kernel works or how the user space interacts with it. And as Linux is getting more complicated year after year, I mean, when I started over 10 years ago, it was a completely different animal to what we have today. And I dread to think how difficult it must be for a newcomer to come along today and try to get up to speed and start hacking. So for someone new to get involved with the infrastructure stuff, I mean, it's pretty much the same advice as we gave people years ago. You start off small and work your way up to some of the nastier stuff, because the integration stuff, it is pretty nasty. And I think that's why a lot of it is kind of neglected in a sense, because it's kind of icky work that no one really wants to sign up for. There's a lot more sort of free-form sort of TBA slots this year. I don't know if that's because we were running out of things to fill the agenda with, or any other reason. But I think it's definitely been useful because we've now got more time to actually fill in the slots on the fly as we come up with things. And I think we're repurposing one of them tomorrow as a general sort of sit-down bug fixing session, which I've actually been trying to push for a few years. So I'm interested to see how that's going to work out. So last year I actually proposed to have a sort of mini summit someplace, to have a day or something to do this, but there wasn't really much. I guess no one wants to be stuck in a room doing nothing but fixing bugs for a day, but maybe we can do it for an hour tomorrow, see how that works out.